Russia's invasion of Ukraine is causing profound and long-lasting changes to policies and energy markets around the world. Could the current situation become an historic turning point towards a cleaner and more secure energy system, whilst also keeping the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal alive?
There is tougher times ahead. There is also good news for the green transition. We are forced by high energy prices to be more energy efficient. And this higher energy fuel, fossil fuel-based prices also make renewables more competitive.
As countries face energy security concerns, the IEA's Renewables 2022 report suggests an increased move to renewables could double in worldwide capacity in the next 5 years to reduce reliance on imported fossil fuels.
This energy crisis is accelerating the investment on clean energy. We have governments trying to protect consumers from the impacts of the energy crisis. The energy crisis is pushing everyone to invest in renewables because they are the ones that are under local and domestic control.
As the shift to renewables gains momentum, increasing energy efficiency by reducing energy waste is a critical factor for both the clean energy transition and our net zero ambitions.
It turns out in the United States and in Europe, roughly 2/3 of primary energy is lost. That is one of the most fundamental problems that this huge wake-up call that Europe has now had, I think, will bring to the surface.
Slowing climate change will be impossible without reducing global reliance on fossil fuels, and this requires increased investment from governments and the private sector, with many arguing that there was insufficient progress made at COP27.
We need to pivot into a clean energy matrix. We need to take our power sector, our transport sector, our industry sectors, and literally move them rapidly towards a clean energy matrix. That's the only way to bring carbon emissions down.
According to the IPCC, it's now or never to bend the curve on emissions. What policies must be put in place now to speed up the global energy transition? And how can business leaders, policymakers and civil society work together to turn commitments and strategies into meaningful action? Welcome to CNBC's IOT Powering the Digital Economy debate, as we focus on the energy transition needed to meet the world's climate goals.
Excellent. Well, that was our scene setter for the upcoming panel. Let me introduce our panelists today. So sitting on my right is Andrzej Górski, the president and CEO of AES, a top renewables player around the world and in the US as well. Sitting to his right is Elizabeth Gaines, the global ambassador for FFI, that is Fortescue Future Industries, former CEO of Fortescue Metals. On her right, we have Dr. Thomas Hohn-Spaworth, the head of sustainability research at Lombard Odier. And then on his right, we have Kıvanç Zaimler, the chairman of Enerjisa Enerji, one of the leading players in Turkey's emerging electricity market. I know I've been giving out a lot of statistics here, but I just want to give one more because, again, this is another scene setter for where we're about to head in this discussion. But last year was the 5th warmest year on record globally, with temperatures about 1.2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. So that's 1.2 degrees. Remember, the target, as per set in the Paris Agreement, was 1.5 degrees Celsius. Back in November, The Economist ran an issue stating that that 1.5 degrees Celsius target is simply not achievable given the current state of affairs. I don't want to be too dismal, and we are going to come up with some solutions on this panel, but this is where we are right now. So, Thomas, I actually would like to start with you, if I may. Just describe to us the scale of the challenge that is ahead.
So one way to compare it to is really as an industrial revolution. We've seen past industrial revolutions, including past energy transitions. What we're really seeing now is the complete transformation of our entire economy. The demand side of our economy, the way we power vehicles, the way we heat our buildings, the way we use energy in industry, all of that needs to be transformed. And we're looking at investment needs in the trillions of dollars, roughly comparable to the amount that actually we've been spending on IT, the digital revolution. Yeah. So we're talking about something of a similar order of magnitude as that quite phenomenal transition in our economy.
What role do you think has the private sector played or not played in investing enough in these types of technologies?
So the private sector is one of the sources of solutions here as well. There's a lot of innovation coming from the private sector, from all parts, from the supply side of the economy, providing green renewable power, the demand side of the economy. And new solutions are emerging as well. And what it is driving is a very rapid reduction in the cost of some of these technologies. We've seen batteries become cheaper. Solar power is the cheapest form of energy on the planet. Electric vehicles, heat pumps are becoming cheaper. And as these technologies become cheaper, we see very rapid increase in adoption of these technologies.
Andres, can I turn to you because you have a lot of expertise, of course, on the topic of renewables. Are you discouraged by what we're witnessing, what we have witnessed in the last couple of years in terms of global emissions?
No, I'm actually more encouraged. In the U.S., we passed the Inflation Reduction Act,
yes.
or IRA. So I think that the U.S. is finally on the right track. And that's going to cause a great expansion of investment in the sector. And really, it's not, in many cases, it's not additional subsidies. It's just taking what they were approving on a yearly basis and putting it out for 10 years. But what we're facing, I very much agree with the comments just said, is a dramatic change. So the one thing is that renewables today are the cheapest form of energy in most cases. The problem is capacity. How do you keep the lights on 24/7? And that's where you have to use lithium-ion batteries on a daily basis. But to really get to a complete decarbonization, we're going to need green hydrogen. We'll probably need small modular nukes, etc. And I also agree very much that what we need is for renewables to be more than just competitive, just better. So there'd be lower cost, equal in quality. And that's honestly what the corporate sector is demanding very much, and many consumers. So I think this has to be, not just top down. It has to be that it's a superior product and people want it. And truthfully, if you included all the costs of fossil fuels, all the externalities, I think it would be probably a killer app today. A killer app. And in the IT sector, when you come up with a solution that's just superior, it's a killer app because it kills the existing applications.
Yeah. So do you agree with the IEA, the International Energy Agency's assessment that despite the horrendous war that is happening in Ukraine, one of the positives out of it is that Europe, for example, has accelerated their drive for moving towards renewables?
In the States, it's really been the IRA. The thing I think with Europe, there's been a huge disruption of supply.
Yeah.
And so people have
been short-term versus long-term.
Yes, scrambling. Yeah. So I think that that's hurt, consumers, and that's hurt the program. So I think in the long term, yes, because it's kind of woke up of the problems of relying on Russian gas. And even from an ecological point of view, I always had some doubts about Russian gas because you're bringing it across 6 time frames across leaky pipelines. And, we don't do enough of the math of what's the actual, if you have like a 10% methane leak, then gas plants are worse than coal plants. So I think what we need is, more fundamental science here. But so at the long run, yes. Short run, I think it's disrupted things a lot. Yeah, no, absolutely. And you see that with the likes of Germany, for example, firing up coal plants again, a very difficult decision-making process. Elizabeth, I'd like to turn to you. I wish you could just sort of explain to us what the FFI initiative is. And I know that there are big ambitions. You want to be one of the greenest energy providers in the world. I've got to say, it does sound a bit incompatible with the fact that is Fortescue, what is known as a mining company. How does a mining company become one of the biggest green energy providers in the world?
Well, mining is an incredibly innovative industry, and people think of it as heavy diggers and equipment, but actually the use of digital and remote and autonomy in the mining sector is second to none. And so we've got a lot of experience in dealing with innovation and the application of new technologies. And we're seeing our ambition is twofold. So one is, yes, we want to be a significant supplier of green energy, and we see green hydrogen as being playing an important role, and we intend to export green hydrogen to those markets where we're seeing enormous demand, partly because of the energy crisis globally. But we're also decarbonising our mining operations. And we have a goal. It's not a net zero goal by 2030, it's a real zero goal by 2030. And to do that, we have to be innovative, we've got to adopt new technologies, we have to rethink how we mine, but we're one of the, I think, the only large industrial companies that is taking a real zero approach by 2030. And in doing so, we will eliminate the use of about 1 billion litres of diesel every year. Now, we need to transition our haul trucks, our trains, all of our mining equipment. But we've got a path to do that, and we're investing $6.2 billion between now and 2030. Over that process, we will generate savings of about $3 billion, so it's about a net $3 billion. And thereafter, the savings to our business will be close to $1 billion a year. Yeah. So it's not just the right thing to do, it's actually the smart thing to do, and it does mitigate those risks of supply of energy, cost of energy, escalating costs. So I think if we can demonstrate that a company like Fortescue can do this, then there is absolutely no reason why other companies and large industrial companies can't follow that lead. Yeah. And we're prepared to make that technology available because it's critically important.
It's really interesting what you're saying about the return on investment. I interviewed Capgemini a couple of days ago. The CEO was on our show, and they had released a survey in the morning showing that only 21% of the 500 companies that they surveyed actually believed that the benefits of investing in a sustainable future outweighed the costs. That's a really low number. So it does entail a lot of upfront investment. But the question is, do investors, are they going to hold on? Are they going to be patient enough to see the return on investment over the medium term?
Well, I would question the modelling of some of those companies and the assumptions that they're making about the future cost of energy, the availability of energy, the introduction of carbon charges. If we factor in all of those potential new costs that we don't currently have in our business, but we know that with the change in regulatory environments, with government policy, that we could see a rapidly escalating cost environment. So for those companies that are saying they can't make the economics work, they just haven't looked at it in the right way. And I don't think that they're taking a future-facing view. They're actually looking at it based on today's assumptions.
Andres, you sound like you wanted to jump in.
What I was going to say, in our case, we've taken a much more aggressive position about reducing carbon emissions than the rest of our sector in the States. A lot of them are catching up now. And just to say that investors, we're growing the fastest. Our renewable sector is growing about 25% a year, but our stock has also been the best performer in the utility sector in the last 5 years. So I think investors are starting to get it.
Yeah.
So at the beginning,
was there skepticism?
Pardon?
There was skepticism at the beginning?
Yeah, laughter sometimes. When you talk about lithium-ion batteries, that roll their eyes like, tell me about the next quarter. But I would say within certainly the last 3 years that has changed. And so being ahead, like she said, can be very good business. But yes, you do have to get that first stage of getting investors comfortable. It's not easy to be the first.
No.
Kıvanç, I want to turn to you. I'm reminded, I wasn't going to ask this question, but I'm just reminded now of a geographical map I looked at around the time of the European parliamentary elections. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because they did this map of all of Europe, and they asked all of these countries to rate, in terms of importance, what matters most going into those elections. And what you found invariably is that the richer, so to speak, countries from the north were more worried about green and the transition, and the poorer countries from the south were worried about the economy, immigration, other issues, etc. The reason I'm putting this to you is because for a long time people say that being able to even think about cleaning and moving towards a greener economy is a luxury that only richer countries can enjoy. Because if you are in an emerging market economy, you're focused on very high levels of inflation, cost of living crisis, et cetera, et cetera. And when you look at the proportion of investment, most of it is happening in advanced economies. What role do you think emerging markets have to play here?
Thank you for the question. For the last 2-3 days, we are talking around energy and the energy trilemma, the supply security, the affordability of the energy, and the climate. And until short time ago, we were talking about renewables just for the climate impact, no emissions. But today we talk about renewables, about to secure our supply as well as for the affordability, for the cost of the renewables. And as indicated in the International Energy Agency report, it is not impossible, but it is very, very, very challenging, because we have not taken the necessary steps altogether. When I say altogether, I mean the developed countries, developing countries, as well as the underdeveloped countries, where 1 billion people have no access to electricity, or 2.5 billion people have no good standards of cooking. So during COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, there have been good decisions taken and good initiatives started, like the hydrogen agreement, memorandum of understanding between Europe and Middle Eastern countries, bilateral agreements, etc. And also, damage and loss fund has been defined. But we have defined only the what question, the how. The answer to how is still missing. And here, the Inflation Reduction Act in US is a good program to promote the activities, the efficiency programs, investments in the US. The Repower in EU is another strong program promoting especially efficiency, but developing countries especially have other needs, have other priorities. The developing countries have to subsidize the energy prices for the affordability. The governments have to secure the supply for their citizens, for their industrial development. In the meantime, make it affordable for them, not only for the citizens, but also for the industries to be competitive enough. Because the cost of energy is more or less the same for all the countries. But the GDP that the developing countries are creating is less than the developed countries. So there's a gap. So the solution seems, in my opinion, a positive approach to developing countries in the financing of the energy transition projects.
At the end of the day, it all comes down to cost, doesn't it? So Thomas, let me put that question to you. Is clean energy affordable at the scale that is required?
That answer to the question is very rapidly shifting. And today I would say yes, it has become the cheapest source of energy. What I think the market at large is underestimating is simply the pace at which this transition is unfolding. And we've done some work looking at past technological revolutions, whether it's the adoption of steamships, of mobile phones, any piece of major sort of new technology of infrastructure. And all of these transitions have tended to follow a very similar pattern. They unfold very slowly at once, and then the transition completes in the span of 10 to 20 years. Yet if you look today at what the market is anticipating, how long it will take us to electrify our buildings, to electrify our vehicle fleet, the time frames there are still much longer. We don't seem to be drawing the lessons that when a new superior technology emerges that becomes cost competitive, that rollout can happen very quickly.
I also, I keep talking about some of the interviews I've done, but I'm here in Davos and interviewing lots of interesting people, and they've given me some unique perspectives. And I was speaking to one of the automakers in India, Mahindra, and they were talking about their hopes for faster EV rollouts and adoption within India. He has high targets. Currently, 1% EV penetration is the total market. He thinks it's going to be 25% in the next 5 to 10 years, so quickly growing. But I think, you know, that's just one example of a cleaner form of transportation. But on one side, you can supply the vehicle, but you need the accompanying infrastructure to go around with it. You need the charging grids. You need to make sure that the battery charging time is faster. All of that, Thomas, do you think that, is it moving fast enough? Is the infrastructure build around the solutions that are coming, is that moving fast enough as well? You need the ecosystem, not just the solution.
I think you're absolutely right. This is why we like to think of this as a true system change. You're not going to get there by making isolated interventions. And yes, you do need multiple stakeholders, policymakers, industry investors to work together. And in some areas that's working better than in others. And sometimes this is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. We create some very powerful feedback loops in this system. Renewable energy created the environmental case for electric vehicles. That created a market for batteries. Now, because these batteries have been so cheap, we're putting that back with renewable power and actually improving the economics there. So it can also be the case that these multiple different parts of the system actually reinforce each other as well.
Andres, if I asked you to fast forward, I don't know, 20 years, or actually forget about that. If you had to paint a picture of your ideal energy mix composition for the world, sources of energy, what would the breakdown look like? Will it ever be 100% renewables?
That's a great question. I think what's very important is the drastic reduction in greenhouse gases, as fast as possible, as soon as possible. I guess what concerns me the most is the supply chain. And it's just that if you look at the amount of lithium that's needed, you know, it has to expand by a factor of 40 from now to 20. When you look at the amount of copper, it has to expand by a factor of 4. So these are humongous numbers.
Yeah.
So I do think it has a lot of things similar to sort of the digital revolution in terms that renewables are superior.
But you're talking about actually mineral resources. These are, there's a finite supply.
That's exactly the point. And differentiating it from the digital is that the amount of these resources that are needed are vast. Much more than, say, the digital revolution. Because the one thing that's wonderful about the digital revolution is that the marginal cost of supplying one more is zero once you have the app up and running. So that, I think, is the concern to me. And that need not be the same solution everywhere. It will be different in different countries. For example, where you have well-built-out grids, a lot of this is how to use the energy more intelligently. So algorithms for energy efficiency, people becoming prosumers with their electric cars. There's a lot you can do there. But if you said, go to Africa, and some place that doesn't have electricity, and a lot of rural Africa does not have electricity, the solution would be different. It'd be distributed. It'd be totally renewable. You don't have to recreate the grid that exists in the developed countries. But renewables really are, I think, again, getting that phase. Because look at what India's doing. 450 gigawatts is the goal that Modi set out.
Yeah.
And also, quite frankly, China was a developing country. And look at the amount of renewables that they're building. So I think that we're building enormous amounts. My concern is that, is there enough of the physical stuff, the raw materials to get that done? And in some cases, even the labor force.
Yeah.
So the approach of AES is really look at where the bottlenecks are. So, for example, coming up with robotics for building solar farms for the labor shortages, coming up with prefab solar, which takes half the space, can be built in a third of the time. We already had come out with the lithium-ion batteries for energy storage. So, really looking at these bottlenecks. Oh, also AI, for efficiency applications. So, that's what I think is needed. And the private sector, unleashed, can do so many things.
Yeah.
So, I think the government, what it has to do is help create a framework. But in most of the places, it's much more, don't get in the way, honestly, of the new technologies.
Can I just ask you a quick question before I go to Elizabeth? I want to talk about green hydrogen, but before that, I want to ask you about natural gas, because there seems to be differing views as to whether or not it's a destination source of energy, destination fuel, or transition fuel. What is your opinion on nat gas and where it fits into the decarbonization drive?
I feel very confident in saying that for the next 20 years, we need natural gas. Now, what we can start to do today is to start to blend it with green hydrogen.
Okay.
So we're running tests that you can blend it up to, say, 20% in existing turbines. And new turbines are coming out that can burn, much higher percentages. But it's just difficult to see that you're going to have enough green hydrogen to substitute it like the next 10 years. We announced the first mega-scale green hydrogen project in the U.S. It's a $4 billion investment together with Air Products. So it seems large. 1.5 gigawatts of power, wind power, to produce it. That can supply 0.1% of the U.S. long-haul trucking fleet. So if you wanted to eliminate, give you an idea, you need 1,000 of them.
It's not enough.
Just for the States. So the same thing with natural gas. So I do think it's a transition fuel, but I think that, it's hard for me to see the next 20 years the grids that I know working without some amount of natural gas.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Elizabeth, I would love to hear your thoughts on green hydrogen. I know that FFI is huge in that space. I also note that over here in Europe, you've signed a deal with the German government to supply the continent the country, I should say, with up to 5 million tons of green hydrogen by 2030. So tell us more about that.
So our plans are, we see green hydrogen as playing probably the most important role in the energy transition. And so we're developing those facilities, similar to the conversation then about the largest installation of renewable energy to produce hydrogen. We're building the world's largest electrolyser manufacturing facility in Queensland at 2 gigawatts per annum. So we see hydrogen playing an important role, and I think for that same reason as well, because a lot of the activities, whether it's heavy transport or mining sector, there are no established grids. We actually have to have energy that can support those harder to electrify industries, and green hydrogen will play an important role. But what we're actually seeing in Europe, and Germany is a good example, particularly with the conflict in the Ukraine, is that there is a huge demand for green renewable energy that has security of supply, and that takes away the challenges that we're currently seeing around that security of supply of fossil fuel. So we're seeing very strong demand, but it needs obviously significant investment. And I think to the point earlier around the resources that are needed to support the green transition, and similar to the production of green hydrogen, we need to work closely with government and regulators. I mean, it's one thing to say we need more lithium, we need more copper.
Of course.
But you can't do that without getting the approvals. And you need the regulatory approvals, the environmental approvals. You know, these things do take time. And we wouldn't want that to be the bottleneck in the energy transition, similar to the skills and resources that we need. So this is going to take a very coordinated effort, working with governments, making sure we have the pathways to realise those ambitions. Green hydrogen is going to be a significant export market for Australia, for example.
People usually say that green hydrogen is quite expensive. So how do you bring that lower? How do you bring the cost of it lower?
Well, people said that about iron ore when we first started mining iron ore. And at that time, it cost us about $50 a tonne to produce iron ore. And now it's $18.
So what do we need to see
so
for it to become? You need scale.
You need technology. You need innovation. So we've used autonomy. You know, we call it the flywheel. I mean, we started at $50. Then we produce more. We get the scale. We've got, obviously, the customers, we've used innovation, autonomy, remote operations, and we've seen the costs come down. And it's a combination of all those things. So the first project that we do may not have the same economics as the second or third or fourth. But in our view, scale is going to be important. The adoption of technology and innovation to make sure we bring those costs down. And whether that's the way we install renewable energy, or solar, for example, using robotics. So there'll be a lot of ways that we can actually make sure that we can reduce those costs and that we actually see the costs come down. And I think, as I said, I think sort of saying, well, it's too expensive, it's missing the point that the more that we do and the more scale that we have, we will see green hydrogen play a very important part in the green energy transition.
As with everything. Kıvanç, I want to turn to you. Well, Turkey is known also to be quite a sunny country. I've been in the summer. It's lovely in the summer. But also that means that there's a lot of potential for solar power. And I saw that the share of electricity produced from solar and wind energy in Turkey accounted for about 21% in July 2022. That was, maybe it's just 1 month because it was the summer month.
Should be more, actually.
Should be more.
Turkey has installed capacity in renewable generation of more than 50%.
Okay.
And the generation is accounting around 35%, to my best knowledge, in the year total. But also touching the hydrogen, especially the green hydrogen. First of all, we need to embrace, we have to welcome, we have to support all the technologies, all the new initiatives, including hydrogen, electrical vehicles.
When we say we, who?
As the world, as the globe, I mean all together. All the people here in Davos, all the governments, all the private sector, all the academia. Because we have to think...
But it isn't just about supporting it, it's also about putting the money into it. And that becomes one of the issues.
The right projects,
the financing.
When the projects are there, financing easy here in this world, no matter of what country, whether it's developed country or developing country. We have to find the right projects. And we have to work in collaboration, in cooperation, especially around hydrogen. No one knows actually the real roadmap towards a hydrogen. No any institution, no any private sector, no any single company. We have to bring all the right people around the table, academicians, governments, private sectors, players around the entire value chain, including the manufacturing of the electrolyzer, the membranes, the green energy producers, the users, and all the value chain. And specifically to your question around Turkey, Turkey has a huge solar potential. And in our national roadmap, we see a huge investment in renewable energy. And believe me, the financing is there. Because we are one of the largest investors. And if we want to invest in renewable energy, we have the access to competitive, sustainability-linked financing. And one more thing, Turkey has the potential to be one of the largest green hydrogen suppliers for Europe, especially for Germany. And we just need to build up the right ecosystem, schedule, plan, the roadmap, and show our ambition.
Well, when you put it like that, it sounds easy.
Believe me, it is easy. I believe, and many people, at least 3,000 people who have attended today in Davos, we all believe. Many others in our companies, in our institution, we all believe it. And it's just acting together, collaboration together.
I think there's also a little bit of selection bias because most of the people who are here in Davos tend to believe in these things. Thomas, I want to turn to you. The reason I just brought that angle up is, look, there has been pushback over sustainability investments. Andres, you talked yourself at the beginning. You were often laughed at. First they ridicule you, and then eventually,
especially the new technologies.
The new technologies, but. And the word ESG, a couple of years ago I was here and people were talking about it as, all of this, there's a wave of optimism in the air. And it feels as though the public's perception of ESG in some places has turned a bit negative because there are certain stakeholders who believe that companies who spend too much time talking about their ESG goals are foregoing their financial commitments. So how does that square into investors' appetite to get involved into these types of technologies, these quote-unquote ESG-friendly technologies? And often, what's publicly traded comes at a premium.
Yeah, I think what we've seen is a very rapid evolution in the mindset of investors. A few years ago, the very question why climate change had anything to do with financial reality was an alien question. We've crossed that bridge, fortunately. Then it became a risk management approach, and we need to integrate ESG considerations just to make sure we won't get caught out. Where I think we're at the cusp of is the realization that integrating at least these forward-looking views as to the direction, the roadmap, the pathway of the economy is the only way you're going to be able to deploy capital effectively if indeed we believe what we're discussing here, that the scale and the pace of this is truly so significant. You do need to do this in the right way, however. The traditional approach to ESG has been to use fairly simplistic metrics, scores, evaluating whether a company has the right policies disclosed on its website. And disclosure and transparency is very important to us, but it's a necessary but not sufficient objective. What we really want to understand is what's the fundamental business model of these companies? What is this economy going to look like by 2030? And are these two things compatible? And if not, does this company have a credible and ambitious enough transition plan to actually realign its business model to what an economy is going to look like by 2030. It's a very different and much more forward-looking way of thinking about sustainability and ultimately, I think, more meaningful.
Andres, do you have a view on how much monetary value investment is actually needed in these types of technologies and clean technologies to get to our targets?
Yes, well, the estimates I've seen is that basically we have to be investing to reach a sort of 2030 goal that we've talked about, a 2050 goal of net zero. We have to be investing the amount of money we've been investing in petroleum and gas. So the world has the resources.
But what are those numbers roughly, if you know them?
Oh, those are in the trillions.
Yeah, I mean, obviously,
like
yeah.
$1.5 trillion a year.
Yeah.
I mean, those are very large numbers. Now, I think that so we can do it. And then now the real question is sort of the returns. Now, getting to do the ESG, it's very interesting. Take people like in the insurance industry, which are very hard-nosed and just statistically driven. They really are starting to price in sort of climate-related natural disasters. And part of it is, can you insure certain types of projects? So companies that aren't, let's say, concerned about ESG, aren't concerned about the climate, won't, I think, perform very well into the future. Because the problem is that we aren't very good at dealing with gradual change. So it's like every year is warmer on average than the prior years, but it's not like it's one of these catastrophe Hollywood movies. But suddenly, when things get really bad, then people will be a change in, let's say, perception of investors. And we're seeing it. It's very hard to, if you wanted to finance a new coal plant. They're just not going to finance it. So, the really sort of hard-nosed, risk calculators are much more advanced, I think, than the public discourse. So unfortunately, the whole issue of ESG is becoming politicized. In the States, they use the term woke. And it's interesting. I think it's 17 attorney generals of the different states have come out and said that their pension funds can't invest in, woke companies that
But you know, you hear things like that and you think, well, what hope is there then for investments in these types of technologies?
It's very interesting. Then when you actually talk in consideration these risks.
So as long as it's not labeled ESG, it's all right then.
It's kind of, it's, I guess maybe don't offend them in your ESG material or something, but it's not having an effect. So in the States, let's say in the prior administration, it was pro-coal. How many coal plants got built in the States? Very, very few. So what I think is interesting is that the perception of investors, the technologies are kind of somewhat dislocated from the, political discourse. And so, yes, we need government to set the framework. And when I say not get in the way, it means like having the right regulations, really pricing externalities. In this whole discussion about greening the electricity grid, we're not talking about the emission of particulates in the cities or where you have the areas. And so, for example, take diesel pollution of cars in Europe. It's tremendous. What is the cost of that? So that's not being included in these equations.
Elizabeth, what role can governments play?
Well, look, I think governments have a huge role to play, and that's right across the, setting the targets from a climate change perspective. If you think about Australia, for example, we've had a change of federal government last year. We now have far more ambitious climate change targets. It's given a roadmap. Business was already getting on with it, quite frankly, but now sort of government's almost catching up with what business was doing, but there's also we need that regulatory environment to support the approval of large-scale renewable projects, for example. So I think governments have a role to play. We've seen that in the US with the Inflation Reduction Act. We've seen this week that Europe's going to follow that.
The proposal out of von der Leyen.
So look, government's got a significant role to play, and governments working with industry can help to accelerate that green energy transition, because we are actually in a crisis, and business as usual, as we know it, is over, because if we don't achieve the goals that have been set, then we are going to see significant changes to our planet. And I just came from a very powerful session with some sort of very preeminent scientists talking about the impact that's having right around the globe. So it's real. Governments have a very, very important role to play, getting access to skills, making sure we have the migration policies that we need, so we get the labour and the resources and the skills that we need. So we do need to work very closely with government. I don't think it can be business doing one thing, government doing another. It's got to be a coordinated effort.
I want to ask you, Kıvanç, how does the spot price of oil affect decision making, do you think, in the industry? When oil is trading north of $100, the money is probably going to flow into oil and gas companies because they want to take advantage of those higher spot prices.
I think this is a challenge for all countries all around the world, because oil prices, consequent to the gas prices, they're not really decoupled, and consequently the power prices. This impacts to every country at different level. And the war has triggered also the regular supply flow in the world, especially around Europe. This also changed a lot of dynamics, so that Europe had to pay more cost for the energy, which has been imported. And this has also changed some balances throughout the world. And I believe a crude oil Brent price of around $70 is the right balance for a long-term affordability. The problem here is that, again, to the previous question, the role of the governments. Many governments in Europe have applied financial or energy regulatory limitations, price caps, or they are discussing those, but still with some unpredictability. I think the predictability here, and also differences between European countries, different practices, some subsidies for overall, some subsidies directly. And as an experience from my country, I'm also experiencing the subsidies in very different way. And we believe for a better future of predictability. Predictability by the regulators, by the policy makers, to secure all these investments. Coming back to your previous question about financing. Financing is relatively the easy part of it. We need right policy setting, right supports, right incentives for our decisions, for our investments, because we are talking about billions or trillions of dollars every year.
Seems like
to
trillions.
Make these investments,
yeah.
We need to see our way. We need to see a better future.
Thomas, what are the clients that you speak to that Lombard ODA covers? What type of investments are they looking at, and which geographies?
I think across the board, we're global asset managers, so we're looking across these transitions, across different themes, across different geographies. What we're seeing is that certain technologies are at different points of maturity. Of course, in certain markets, the economics work slightly differently. Economics of different energy sources depends on local label rates and local access to certain energy sources. So of course, you need to take a very local view. What is exciting is that the direction of travel is broadly the same across all geographies. And if anything, we're seeing a little bit of a renewable energy weapon race in the region. We've talked a lot about the Inflation Reduction Act. In the EU, we've got the EU Green Deal. In China, we see extremely high public and private spending as well on this. So this is no longer a phenomenon just located in one.
Yeah, the train has left the station.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to ask one final question to all of you. If you could give me just a number of where we are today versus stated ambition of where we need to get to. So 0 is we've done nothing, 10 is we're there. Where do you think we are today, and where do you think we will be in 5 years?
I would say we're at maybe 6 today.
Okay, it's better than I thought.
5 years, I would say hopefully 7 or 8.
Okay.
I'd probably say today we're around about 4, and in 5 years, yeah, we should be at 7 or 8.
I'll give you an example. This year, 11% of vehicles were electric. By 2030, we think it's going to be 60 or 70%.
Yeah.
From 6 to 10.
From 6 to 10 in 5 years' time. It's good to be ambitious.
Put the ambition. That's my wishful thinking.
Yeah. Well, thank you all very much. And this was a really fruitful discussion. And I also like that we ended on a positive note, because perhaps I started it with a bit of a negative spin with the global emissions rising. But it is great to see that there are solutions, and that you are working on the right solutions that we need to encourage that transition. And it's good to see that the investment appetite is there to accompany it as well. And hopefully we'll be back here in coming years and talking about all the things that we have done, rather than looking ahead to what we need to do to bolster this transition further. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really fascinating. Thank you so much, panelists, for a wonderful debate. Thank you so much. I hope you stay exactly where you are. You're not allowed to leave, sir. We are about to swiftly move on to our next really interesting panel here at the Filecoin Sanctuary. We just need 1 minute to rearrange the chairs, a bit of chair tango happening up here, and then we'll be ready to go. We'll see you later. You promise.